I started my account for the apocalypse, basically. I think the apocalypse also triggered more production of this sort of content because there's so many people that are hungry for the right kind of information. Yeah, there's definitely been a lot of consumption of health related content recently. And I suppose that's a good shift. I stepped in with the idea of talking more about gynecology and just sexual health. The way we treat women's health is so sad. As doctors, it is our responsibility to create a safe environment for our patients. The way we stigmatize sexual health, the way we talk about AIDS is always as a punchline of some jokes. And I live in Texas, which is probably at the same level, if not worse than India in terms of sex ed. I think because of the pandemic, again, it has the silver lining behind all of this going to hell is that there's even more people consuming video content on the internet. I started my account really for the apocalypse, basically. I think the apocalypse also triggered more production of this sort of content because there's so many people that are hungry for the right kind of information. And maybe news channels are not adequate for it. They don't provide information. Their job is not to provide information. Their job is to report. So there were so many people that were looking to understand this newfangled thing that is happening that even scientists don't know enough about. So whatever was coming out to the general public was really complicated. So I think maybe doctors stepped into that area to simplify stuff. And obviously, people want to learn about their bodies. People want to learn about the general world. People want to learn about this crazy new virus. So I think, yeah, there's definitely been a lot of consumption of health-related content recently. And I suppose that's a good shift. My parents have a fertility center, so I used to work there as a junior gynecologist. And what I found that so many people that used to come to us for their regular follow-ups and all stopped coming. Only people who had, say, a pregnancy and they were due were coming to the hospital. People with chronic conditions stopped following up because there was this risk that, you don't want to go to the hospital. It's a high-risk environment. But also, people were just so afraid of not knowing what's out there. And even we were very afraid of not knowing what's out there. All other issues, conversations around other topics, funding around other health topics had a mass shift towards coronavirus. I stepped in with the idea of talking more about gynecology and just sexual health. But I knew that, of course, when I started, COVID wasn't there. Did it exist? I'm sure it did. Yeah, it did. But it didn't exist anywhere else in the world. I also feel that with content creation, you don't go in with a lot of plan. You go in with, okay, let's see what works. And for me, I was lucky that what I wanted to do was what worked out. I very rarely touch upon COVID. For example, when we had the second wave and it was a really bad situation in our country. So when I did start doing this content, the only time I was focusing on anything COVID related was during the second wave when there was a really bad situation in our country and people did need more information. People did need a little bit more clarity because we knew nothing at that time. It just hit us out of nowhere. So I don't think COVID would be a very central part of my content, but I do believe it has given the impetus in the right direction for a lot of doctor content creators to create more around this. So I'm not 100% sure on where I read this quote and if I'm accurate with the numbers, but I think a condition like endometriosis, which is a very painful condition. So what happens in endometriosis is that your periods become extremely painful and you need constant medical supervision every time you have a period, and period are a monthly occurrence for most people. So this is something that genuinely impacts the quality of your life. Endometriosis research gets only 14%, and once again, I'm not sure on the number, but only gets 14% of the funding that erectile dysfunction gets. And erectile dysfunction is a condition in which people have a problem getting an erection. So the research, just the focus on even something as chronic and something as impactful as endometriosis. And that's not to say that erectile dysfunction is not impactful. Sure, it does impact you in a psychological way, of course, but it doesn't constantly ruin your quality of life every single month. The way we treat women's health is so sad in science, in popular culture, in everywhere. That we definitely need more of a focus on this. And this is not just something I'm spouting off of social media. This is a well-recognized phenomena in all kinds of science. So yes, we definitely do need more money and we do need more focus on this. And I'm glad there's problem-centric startups that are sprouting up. For example, we've got Vera Health, which focuses on PCOS. We've got Ara Health, which focuses on women's health in general. We've got Ozaiva Nutrition, I think, which focuses on PCOS again. Yes, things are starting, but we have a long way to go. I think it's mostly through learning from friends who could not. I mean, even if I were doing anything stupid, I couldn't go walk up to any random gynecologist and be like, yeah, so I masturbated and this happened or whatever. My mom's also a gynecologist, which helps, which made my life significantly easier. And she's a very non-judgmental, sex-positive gynecologist, thankfully. So I think it was partly inspired by her. I think I saw a non-judgmental sex-positive gynecologist, and my dad's a fertility doctor as well. They're both very similar in their approach towards this. I think because I saw that at home, even before I knew what a sex positive and inclusive doctor is supposed to be, I sort of had this idea in mind that this is what a doctor is supposed to be like. And then I stepped out into the real world and I went to medical school and I realized that this is not the norm. And I was shamed quite often by my professors for taking, say, detailed sexual histories or just being very frank in my conversation about sex and sexual health. So I shut it down and I learned not to talk about this. But then I figured that if we're not talking about this, as doctors, it is our responsibility to create a safe environment for our patients and just the general public, or conversations around public health and issues around public health. The way we stigmatize sexual health, like, AIDS is a joke. The way we talk about AIDS is always as a punchline of some joke. Situations like this, that I felt like all of these conditions informed my decision to talk about this, but also the fact that there is so much disinformation on the internet right now, particularly around women's health and menstrual health. Influencers with absolutely zero background in any training in this area have decided to come and speak about this and spout off absolute nonsense. So I felt like there was a need for real, authentic medical information in this world of unqualified influencers. I am more privileged in a lot of ways as a doctor influencer because, I speak the social media lingo and, I look a certain way that is more acceptable to a lot of people. And I feel like all of that made my journey easier. But in medical school, we're not taught how to simplify topics. When you go to a doctor, they won't tell you, okay, beta, I'm going to do a laparoscopy for you, which involves me putting a small slice in your tummy and then putting a camera through there and seeing your inside. They'll be like, oh yeah, you have a complicated condition and I'm going to do a laparoscopy and we'll do a histopathology and see what happens. We're not taught to explain the condition at all. And I'm not saying that we also don't have the responsibility of doing it on our own, even though we're not taught that, but it's just not programmed into us when we're in medical school or even in our further training. I think it's definitely quite difficult to learn how to do this, because it's, how we do those just a minute practices in school or half a minute practices in school. Reels are 30 seconds and 60 seconds. So you have to explain a complicated topic in 30 seconds or 60 seconds. So it's difficult to learn. In terms of backlash, yes, it was awful. As a woman talking about sex on the internet, as a woman on the internet, it's going to be awful. But as a woman on the internet with a public profile that talks about sex, you know what's going to happen. So there was a lot of trolling, definitely. There was a lot of you're against Indian culture nonsense, but I don't know. I think it fizzled out or I learned to ignore it. I'm going to make a controversial statement, but I think sex positivity has become trendy in a good way, as it should be. I don't know if trendy is the right word, but it should be more acceptable. And thankfully, it's becoming a trend. There are a lot of influencers that are getting into this space now. So it's becoming, at least in the online space, a little bit more normalized. Hopefully, this will spill over into the real world. I don't know if it has, because this is the world I exist in. I live in a small bubble where we loudly talk about these things. I don't know what it's like outside this bubble. So I hope it changes things. I really hope it spills over. So I'm currently based out of the US and I live in Texas, which is probably at the same level, if not worse than India in terms of sex ed. At least in India, the sex ed programs we do have, even in our reproduction chapters, are medically validated. In the US, in I think 20 states, they're not even required to have medically accurate sex ed programs. So I'm sorry for the word, but it's a cluster everywhere. I think because of the pandemic, again, it has the silver lining behind all of this going to hell, is that there's even more people consuming video content on the internet. So I think financial year 2023 projection is that we will have 500 million video content consumers consumers in India. 500 million is a little over 1/3 of the Indian population. And that's a lot of people, that's so many people that you can reach. The good thing about video content is that it doesn't have a lot of barriers that traditional information sources have. You don't need to have a TV, you don't need to have a dish connection, you don't need to go to some class. Most of everybody in India has a phone, even people who come from low socioeconomic backgrounds. And most of India, thanks to Jio and then now Starlink coming to India, is going to be very, very connected. I feel like there is such a good platform to provide this. You don't need anything other than a phone and an internet connection to access this kind of content. And now also we're having this sort of content in regional languages as well. I think the internet is a very good place to start. And yes, real world makes a difference. But in the current scenario, can we really do real world stuff? Not really, not in a mass scale. And then secondly, there's actually a curtain of anonymity that helps in doing this stuff online. You can consume this content without feeling awkward, because a lot of times these sex ed classes are so awkward. You want to ask a question, but you're like, oh my God, can I ask this in front of 25 people? Or what will the educator think of me? We don't have that problem anymore. You type stuff in a chat box, you can put on an anonymous name. Nobody knows who you are. I think it's definitely a great place to start. And I think it's going to spill over again into the rest of the world. If we normalize these conversations on a reflection of our real world, which is the online world, we can normalize this conversation in the real world as well. But I'm very optimistic as a person, and I know this is not realistic. So I have seen growths that I had not imagined, which means that there is definitely a space and a need for this conversation, and people want to engage. So if you are a qualified doctor, or if you have any kind of qualifications in health education, please step ahead. If you don't have these qualifications, get those qualifications and then talk. Don't be one of those random people who just... On top of all of that, I think the biggest message that I would like to send everybody who's listening to this is, please get yourself vaccinated against the HPV. HPV is a virus that is very strongly linked with more than 90% of all cases of cervical cancer. And at this moment, unfortunately, in India, it's only available to women. So penis owners cannot get this vaccine. If you have a cervix, please get this vaccine. It is the only vaccine in the whole world that prevents cancer. Just get it. It only costs 2,000 rupees and you need 3 doses. That's it.